According to this son of a bitch over here, you can see I'm pointing. I'm live. Just fascinating. Almost as fascinating as all of this great MMA news that has broken either today or within the past week since I last spoke at length to you, my friends and followers. What the fuck? I was getting playback. I love hearing myself talk so much that I'm doing my show alone twice in a row, and my computer is playing me back to me. We're going to have a talk about that shit later so I can hear myself talk. Anyway, for those of you who don't know, a bunch of cool shit's happened in the UFC. So much cool shit, I couldn't wait for my co-hosts to become available. So I'm just doing this shit by myself. Brian, Brett, you're with me always. It's like Brian is this half of the heart, and Brett is this half of the heart. And together they make one heart. And inside of it's the love for all of our fans. Whatever. You know who doesn't seem to love their fans very much? People in Iceland who are training and are too belabored with themselves to make media appearances. Yeah, I'm talking about Conor McGregor. What the fuck, my dear man? It's like you're fighting Nate Diaz. You have talked very specifically about the Diaz brothers and their history. Did you forget when Nick Diaz missed out on a giant title shot because he decided to fuck off and not go to a press conference? I'm sorry, what? And you thought, I'm untouchable. No, you're not. You're an asshole who just lost a match, and by the grace of God in hell or heaven, you somehow miraculously schmoozed your way into a rematch that you didn't deserve, that nobody wanted, to headline the biggest, the butt-fucking biggest UFC in the world, and you don't show up for media day? Are you fucking kidding me, good sir? The only explanation is that you have found the fountain of youth in some hot spring in Iceland, and you are just regenerating your body and doing mass amounts of damage. Or, as some people have pontificated online, perhaps you are avoiding the good state of Nevada. Why? Because you're stateside if you come for the UFC 197 proceedings and to film your commercial and all that. And you know whose stateside is? USADA. They don't have to pay for a giant plane ticket out to Iceland. So I'm not saying it because that would be accusatory and could subject me to criticism, but some of my friends and followers have said it, and I'm just, it's just the grapevine, my friend. Is there credence to that? We have heard so many people take jabs at Conor McGregor, and Conor's defense this whole time has been he's been the most tested fighter under USADA. I don't think that there's much to it, to be honest. I just like talking shit. And it's an interesting point that you can look at because it just seems like this is oddly defiant. And he doesn't really get anything out of it. What I thought was very interesting is that he jumped ahead of the UFC. For those of you who don't know, I've kind of flown through this story. So if you've just had your head up your ass, under the sand, wherever it may be, you might not know. So we'll go back through the timeline of my afternoon. While I'm supposed to be working, I am perusing my cellular phone. I see a tweet from Conor McGregor, something to the effect of, "I've decided to retire young. Thanks for the cheese. See you later." Something to that effect. And, well, it's just frustrating to me. I was sitting and seeing this tweet, and I saw it go by. Then I saw a bunch of other tweets filter in on this timeline. People just enamored with the idea. Oh, is he serious? I thought that it was just mere fuckery, and he was trying to, in some way, incite a bunch of attention, maybe to renegotiate. But I never would have thought that he was the one actively making himself off of a card. I thought that it was either a contract negotiation or some serious shit had happened, whether it be a USADA bust or something that actually did happen. Those of you who don't know, Conor was supposed to show up in Las Vegas today, Tuesday, when Nate Diaz, who's actually there right now for the best of my understanding. You have one half of a main event who's actually present, but not the other half. He didn't show up. He's failed to attend the media conferences. He's failed to help create the commercial. And in doing so, Dana White went on ESPN ScoreCenter and said, "Hey, guess what? Nah, dog, you're out. Peace, though." And what I thought was very interesting is that Dana White has been incredibly respectful. I mean, when you have Dana who's upset about something, he's very quick to call somebody a dummy or what have you. In this regard, he repeatedly said in this statement, I have nothing but respect for Conor. I respect Conor. Well, that's great and dandy. If you did it to somebody else, if there was some other fighter on the roster who decided to fuck off on media, I'm pretty sure he'd be a little bit more critical. But he knows the numbers that Conor brings in. So this is something that I personally took a lot of joy in seeing. The UFC actually kind of did the right thing. You know, here's a guy who bit the hand that feeds, smacked him on the hand, and yeah, they're preserving their relationship the best they can. They didn't strip him of a title. They didn't do any of a number of things that they could have. They took a big payday away, and now they're restructuring a card. And it almost works out better for them because now there's going to be a hell of a lot of headlines that never would have been. A lot of intrigue and interest because you have the highest profile fighter who's ever been taken out for a disciplinary reason aside from Jon Jones. And so you're going to have whoever comes in and fills that spot is going to get a bunch of good press. And boom, we have a card that's completely restructured, and now we can do it on a meritocracy base. Because what were us as fans clamoring about? We were saying, hey, dickholes, this is not a fight that we need to see. There's no merit to it. There's no point to it. It doesn't change a single division, doesn't change a single ranking. All it does is waste our time and give us something to spend money on. So now we can really revamp this card and put a solid main event at the top. Can we? Ideally, we could. You know, Daniel Cormier has said that he will be healed up. His shin splint will be fine and dandy by the time of UFC 200. So Jon Jones might be able to come and save the motherfucking day twice in one calendar year. You might remember he's taking the short notice fight against OSP this weekend at UFC 197, which we will be breaking down in the podcast right after this. This is the first time I've ever done the broadcast first, but this is also the first time I've had the best breaking news. Fuck you guys and all your podcasts that air on Monday. I'm the real damn show because I wait for all of your headlines and then I steal them. Ha ha. But my point being, Jon Jones can just as easily go, if he beats OSP, does so in a fashion, doesn't have to be impressive, so long as the guy's not fucking injured, he could headline UFC 200, and he's in a great position to headline the UFC in November in Madison Square motherfucking Garden. This could be the year of Jon Jones. So that's a possibility. Frustrating situations, though, you have the lower weight classes. They're all kind of booked and taken. You have Dominic Cruz, Uriah Faber. Obviously, Mighty Mouse and Henry Cejudo are fighting on this card this weekend. You have the lightweight belt being defended by RDA against Eddie Alvarez. Then you go up. There's a thunderous silence at welterweight. And Dana White has alluded that he thinks that either 201 or 202 would be a great opportunity for Robbie Lawler to fight Tyron Woodley for the UFC welterweight title. Well, shit, dog. Why don't we move that a couple weeks earlier? Or maybe if we're the UFC, we hustle and get GSP signed on a fucking contract, and then bada bing, bada boom, you have the return of GSP at UFC 200 for a motherfucking title that he never lost. Unless you're Johnny Hendricks fans, at which point you say that he lost desperately. My point being, there is a lot of really cool content that we could generate for this card. I am so excited that Conor McGregor fucked his life up like this. And to be fair, I don't begrudge the guy. I just think he's a bit of a tit. All the time he says all these things, talks about pride, talks about honor, talks about how he loves his family, but then he's not going to do the basic necessities to get to where he is. I mean, my friend, let's think about this. And you know he has contracts that he's signed that say he has a specific obligation. And I think this is an opportunity for the UFC, especially Dana White, who even acknowledged the fact that everybody's saying he coddles Conor McGregor. He gets to say, I don't coddle Conor McGregor. Conor McGregor sucks my nuts because I'm the man around the UFC. I might be paraphrasing a little bit, but hey, who the fuck cares? My point being, there's a lot of fun things that we could do in that spot. Now, apparently, Nate Diaz is already in Las Vegas, and Dana White alluded to the fact that they're going to be talking about a replacement matchup for Nate Diaz. Well, I don't think it's going to be a main event. The only person I could see a main event position being where Nate Diaz still stays would be against GSP, and like I said, GSP still hasn't signed a contract to return, was trying to be kind of cryptic with Ariel Helwani. But what I thought the big tell in that interview was the fact that GSP barely talked about his dinosaur show. If the only reason he's on is to promote his own shit, why is he only talking about the potential of fighting, building intrigue and interest? Now, if you listen to GSP on the MMA Hour on Monday, he was sending mixed messages about how he feels. But one of the big sticking points he said is that the Reebok deal. You'll remember the last time GSP fought was pre-Reebok. Now, outwardly, he's always been pro drug testing and everything, so I don't think that there's any shenanigans going on with USADA. But Reebok is a big, fucked up situation for GSP. GSP's already sat on a grip of money that Under Armour could have been paying him in cage sponsorships because they didn't want to pay the tax, and they were a direct competitor. Now, GSP gets no sponsors. And while he does have an impressive tenure with the UFC, they're really going to need to offset that income because he's kind of the biggest name in the fucking sport. I don't know how much Hayabusa was paying him or Zions was paying him back in the day, but I guarantee it was more than the pittance Reebok can give you. I can give you that out of my checking account, booyah, which is an insult to you and me. Oh, well. The fact is, we're not that far off from the potential return of GSP. And now he's the one saying it's not going to Faraz Sahabi, Rory McDonald, or any of a number of guys who make a headline for themselves by mentioning GSP's name. So there is the potential that GSP could face Nate Diaz. And I don't think that fight would necessarily be an exciting one because I think that GSP would do to Nate what he did to Nick. But I do think that GSP versus Robbie Lawler would be a fucking tremendous fight. I think that Robbie's takedown defense, starting at the wee age of 17 in Militich fighting systems, would do pretty damn well against modern GSP. Going back to Nate Diaz, is there a single fight that makes sense for Nate Diaz to stay in the UFC 200 main event aside from GSP? I say the name, my friends. It just doesn't make sense. I don't see how that shakes out in the card. But if you have an option, let us know. Send us a comment. I think you can do that shit right now live, motherfuckers. There's a little icon in the corner that says that I'm live. So why not? Go ahead. Send a question or something. I pressed the button. Yep. Okay, now you can send the questions that I thought you could send before. So fuck me. I'm stupid. But I have one viewer riveted and enthralled with what I'm saying. So that's fine for me. Moving on, blah, blah. I've talked about the conspiracy. I've talked about the media. What do you do with Conor McGregor? Is it a punishment enough that he just goes back to featherweight? Because here's an interesting thing. Jose Aldo, Frankie Edgar is not off the card. Conor McGregor's off the card. The featherweight champion is off the card, but the interim featherweight championship is still being decided at UFC 200. So the earliest that Conor is going to get on a card after this, 201, 202, this is effectively a 6-month suspension, if you will. And so he has to sit by and let number one beat number two. Is this really that big of a punishment? Because he just took out one of his biggest competitors. Either Frankie Edgar beats Jose Aldo, which I hope will happen as a lifelong Frankie Edgar fan, or Jose Aldo beats Frankie Edgar. In either situation, he just eliminated 50% of the greatest threat to his title reign in featherweight. I mean, you could make a pretty solid argument that he kind of wiped out the division if he beats those two guys. So then he can just go on his merry way. And now think about this. If you're Jose Aldo and you lose to Frankie Edgar, you're on the first 2-fight skid of your entire career. How many fights do you have to do before you get back to title contention? Or if you're Frankie Edgar and you've had to get this amount of fights just to get a title shot, when's the next time he's going to be able to do that? You see where I'm going here? It's a punishment, but it's not really a punishment. It's a punishment to the pocketbook. When you look at the long-term career trajectory, he's not taking it up the ass that hard, my friends. They did plenty of lubrication before plunk. And for those of you who don't watch on YouTube, I just took my thumb and inserted it between my other thumb and ring finger in a forcible fashion to connotate butt rape. So let that soak in. For those of you just joining us, I just gestured butt rape with my hands. And we're moving on. Fedor Emelianenko is going to fight Fabio Maldonado in some bullshit promotion I know nothing about, and apparently it's going to be on Fight Pass, which just fucking infuriates me. What the fuck, man? The UFC paid him more than Ryzen. That's a public statement that's gone out, and now he's fighting for a promotion that's going to be on Fight Pass instead of fighting in the UFC. Do you see? I have been saying this for years. Fedor never fights in the UFC, ever. Even given the greatest opportunity, he's not going to do it, and he's not going to do it now. Let's just drop it. That's all. I wrote it down on my handy-dandy legal pad just so I could throw that headline away in the fucking trash. We don't need to talk about Fedor in the UFC because the fact is, Fedor wouldn't cut it in the UFC. He wouldn't have cut it then. He wouldn't have cut it now. You can quote me on it. I'm sorry. I know it's an unpopular opinion. I'm not a guy who had a dichotomy where I thought that Randy Couture or Fedor, or it had to be Anderson Silva or Fedor. I don't think that there can only be one greatest of all time. I think that truly each division deserves a greatest of all time. And I just don't think that Fedor is now, and I don't think he was within the last 6 years to where he could have been competitive in the UFC's heavyweight division. He might be able to score 2 or 3 wins together, but imagine him versus Jared Rosholt. Jared Rosholt, I think, would have fared pretty fucking well against Fedor. He would have immobilized him and just laid on top of him. And that's all he would have had to do was survive, and he's the kind of guy who's willing to do that. Now, guys who are going to put themselves in a risky situation to fight Fedor, like Andrei Arlovsky, he's going to jump head first and let you just punch him in the fucking chin for glory and combat and death. That's why I love Andrei Arlovsky, but I think you see my point. Fedor's strengths are exemplified by other people's poor judgment or poor preparation in the octagon or cage. I don't think there's any guy in the UFC who's going to underestimate Fedor, especially with the kind of pageantry that it would draw. So let's just drop it. No Fedor, no more. No Fedor, no problems. Moving on. John Jones has come out and publicly said that he was a drug addict in the press leading up to UFC 197. And I think that's a very involved thing to say. I said involved, not evolved, just to clarify myself. I will make sure to be very harsh in my post-show notes. But I think that's a very heavy thing to say, and I don't think that it was necessarily given the proper weight. You know, we've had John Jones be accused of a bunch of things, and this is a guy who went on multinational news and was like, I just smoked weed. I did cocaine once. I'm sorry. I'll never do it again. This is a guy who spent one night in rehab, and now, obviously, posthumously to the problem, he's saying that he was a drug addict, and a drug addict is that's not a cured thing. It's something that you live with. And I think it's very interesting, and I think it kind of contextualizes that John Jones is at least aware that he has ongoing problems. And so he might have been dramatizing, he might have been exaggerating, he might have been fishing for some headlines, but let's admit the fact there are other ways he could have gotten headlines. He could have teased that he was retiring. Who fucking knows? But the point being, he very easily could have phrased things in a different way. He chose this, and I think to Daniel Cormier's point, which he kept belaboring that John Jones wasn't taking the proper weight of his actions, this kind of connotates to me that he has accepted the gravitas of his misgivings with the law. I'm very excited to see that fight. And again, for those of you who are just joining us, I will be talking about that fight at length on the podcast. So let's move along. UFC 198, they put out the promo for it this week, and it was one of the best promos I've ever seen. A, it was different. B, I didn't hear Joe Rogan or Mike Goldberg yell once. And C, it went through the whole fucking card. Everybody got what at least appeared to me to be equal time. I don't know. I didn't keep a stopwatch like Gene LaBelle. But you start off with Fabricio Verdum. You go to Cyborg. You go to, I think it was Jacare. You go to Anderson. You go to Vitor. If I'm missing anybody, I'm sorry. I thought that it was great. It had good music that was very bombastic and exciting. It showed each person. Obviously, and I've been saying it on this show for a while, this show is the UFC 200 for Brazil. It's the show that the Brazilian fans deserve. I am so fucking excited about this show. I'm not even upset that there isn't an American or contender version for these guys. I don't think that there needs to be a Stipe and Uriah Hall and blah, blah. I love this promo as it stands. The one criticism I had was that Shogun just kind of stands there and folds his arms, and he just walks. I don't know if he knew they were filming, so maybe he gets a second go at it. We can re-edit that and just kind of plug him in later. Everybody else looked great, even Vitor Belfort with his dad bod tummy tum, which is funny. It's amazing how a fighter's physique can change so rapidly with one fight camp, but Vitor doesn't look near as goddamn fat as he did, and his titties aren't so moosey. One thing I really, really loved was that Cyborg got the second billing under the UFC heavyweight champion, the reigning, defending UFC heavyweight champion. The woman who's being introduced in a weight class that doesn't exist gets second billing on this promo. I loved it. I thought it was great. I have made fun of Chris Cyborg many a time. So many times, in fact, I think I'm blocked on all of her social media accounts. And for that, I'm sorry. I just like talking shit, and she's a lightning rod for it. She draws a lot of eyes because she's incredibly talented, and she's full of steroids. but I'm very excited to watch this fight. I've never actually seen a public execution, and so when Leslie Smith goes in there and gets her head chopped off of her body, I mean, we're all in for history. But that card is astounding. I cannot wait to be covering that. Hopefully, I won't be doing that alone, and I'll have co-hosts a head here and a head here, and we'll all be chatting, so I won't be grating on your ears with my obnoxious, somewhat nasally voice that I am, yes, indeed, aware of. One thing I don't know if you're aware of, you see that transition, motherfuckers? Diego Brandao has lost his butt-fucking mind. Diego Brandao was an Ultimate Fighter, and now he's suspended for marijuana, and he just decided to beat the shit out of 3 people at a strip club in Albuquerque. What? I think he made a wrong turn in Albuquerque, to coin a phrase from Chuck Jones. But this is a guy who was intoxicated trying to get into a strip club, and then he punched an Anthony Romero, and then he pistol whipped a Patrick Otero and put a gun underneath his jaw, and then there was some other guy. And Diego Brandao so far hasn't been outwardly punished by the UFC, but they did issue a statement that something had happened at a business establishment. Like an incident happened at a business establishment, I believe is the exact phrasing, which is just the PC police just went through and no strip club, no gun. Something happened somewhere is effectively all they told you. And I thought it was kind of brilliant because facts are Diego Brandao, really, in some places he's being, the headline reads, Conor McGregor's former opponent did this bullshit. He doesn't draw his own attention. I know. I made 2 memes about this bitch on my Instagram account. I hashtagged them, and they have the least amount of likes of any posts that I have this week. So thanks, Diego. I can't siphon your fame, you tit. But this is something that's incredibly serious. This is the kind of thing when people talk about human cockfighting and how MMA fighters are just the bane of our existence and terrible people. How are you going to say that the drunk guy trying to break into a strip club, whipping people with a pistol, how is that not like, if I was trying to create the guy who I could point to and be like, that's why violence is bad, because violence begets violence, and that's what it is. And he's a hypersexualized dwarf with weird ears. Isn't he a Mormon? I think I remember that. I think that just struck my brain, is that he was of the Latter-day Saints, and at a press conference, he busted out his Latter-day Saints Bible. If I'm much confused, please let me know. But if you can verify that, fans, put it in the side. I want to know. I think I'm asking you a question here. Was Diego Brandao a Mormon? He might not currently be. He might be on the outs. I don't know. I've never seen him wear religious underwear into the octagon, but not to say it might not be underneath, kind of pulling a Donald Cerrone and just putting your non-Reebok apparel under the shorts. See? We're thinking here. Moving on. Paul Daly, Josh Koscheck. I saw headlines about this spinning and whirring all through the ether of the internet saying that there was a violent altercation at their standoff. No. Daly got close. Koscheck put his fingertips on Daly's tummy-tum, gently pushed back. And Scott Coker said, hey, face the cameras. Hey, guys, face the cameras. Hey, face the cameras. And they didn't listen to him. And that's about as insubordinate as they got. Because Liam McGeary, the Bellator champion who I forgot existed for 20 minutes this morning when I was just thinking about their divisions, he came back in glorious fashion. He grabs Paul Daly and is like, not today, bitch. Makes him face forward. And that was it. I thought it was amazing that they were trying to make such big headlines out of it. I'm wondering if, much like the political media, the MMA media is having their wheels greased by a giant conglomerate like Viacom. You can feel the burn here on this podcast, ladies and gentlemen, because I can't be bought, because I don't have a price, because I am worthless. Booyah. Now my heart hurts. So I think I'm just going to do one more story. Joseph Benavidez is apparently no longer a card-carrying member of Team Alpha Male. It came out this week that he hasn't been in the gym, and we know we've seen him with Dwayne Ludwig and TJ Dillashaw abroad in Colorado. So I thought that was very interesting. Justin Buchholz saying that he really wished that Joseph would have given him a chance as head coach with Chris Holdsworth. I don't know that that's necessarily a bad thing. He was having great success with Dwayne Ludwig, and he stayed loyal to the camp, even to his disadvantage, and still did well. And now, why not go back? The biggest flaw with Team Alpha Male since Dwayne Ludwig left is that there hasn't been a central figure to be the coach. I mean, Martin Kampman did a good job, good enough as he could, but he never intended to stay permanently, from what I can gather. And he didn't stay permanently. In fact, he's already gone a year later. So you have a former fighter, current fighter, who doesn't have a very impressive record, another former fighter, current fighter, who has been out with a concussion syndrome for over a year, and both of them are being coaches. And I don't know that it's necessarily they had a passion for coaching so much as they can't do the thing they would do otherwise. Like, to me, it seems like Greg Jackson, for example, is a guy who's always wanted to be Greg Jackson. You know, it seems to me that Demetrius Johnson's coach, Matt Hume, had a fight career and then stopped, not because he couldn't do it, but because he wanted to dedicate himself to coaching. I think that this is a different situation. I can't begrudge Joseph Benavidez, and I think that he'll do very well in Colorado with Dwayne Ludwig and TJ Dillashaw. And I think that, you know, now that TJ is not at, not the champion at bantamweight, you could see Joseph Benavidez make a glorious return to bantamweight. Why the fuck not? I mean, he already has losses to Dominic Cruz, but Dominic could just as easily be dethroned in the time it takes Joseph Benavidez to go from unranked to #1 ranked. Booyakasha. So these are just some thoughts that I had about all of the headlines for this week in MMA. If you're interested in my thoughts on the last weekend's card and this weekend's card, I can jerk them off for you all over my face in the podcast, which I'll be recording in about 2 minutes. What I'm going to do is I'm going to press that stop record button, and I'm going to press the start record button, and I'm just going to start rambling. I'm not even going to stop talking. I'm just going to jibber jab the whole time as if I was Woody Woodpecker, for fuck's sake.